Your case is very rare and there's nothing else we can do, said a doctor. But the next day, it's a miracle. Science cannot explain what just happened. The story you're about to hear is a true account. The names of characters and places have been changed to protect the privacy of its authors. If you believe in miracles or have experienced one, leave your opinion in the comments and subscribe. Do you know that feeling when something's wrong, but you can't quite point out what it is? That's how it all began. A persistent cough that wouldn't go away. Nothing that cough syrup couldn't fix, or so I thought. But boy, was I wrong. It was a Tuesday night. I remember it as if it were yesterday. I was sitting on the couch, watching a soccer game with my brother, when suddenly it felt like someone had punched me in the chest. Breathing became heavy, as if I was trying to inhale air through a straw. "Are you okay, brother?" my brother asked, noticing my discomfort. "I think so," I replied, but my voice came out hoarse and weak. I tried to stand up and almost fell. My brother held me, panic evident in his eyes. "Stop trying to act tough," he said, already taking the car keys. "We're going to the hospital now." The journey to the hospital was a blur. I remember looking out the window, the city lights passing like smears, while I struggled to breathe. Each breath was a battle, as if my lungs were refusing to cooperate. In the emergency room, things quickly got worse. Doctors rushed back and forth, speaking in terms I barely understood. "Acute respiratory distress syndrome," they said. ARDS. It seemed like something out of those medical shows, not something that could happen to me. "Mr. Silva," the doctor approached, his expression grave. "We need to admit you immediately. Your condition is critical." Critical. The word echoed in my head like a death knell. I saw the fear in my family's eyes when they arrived. My mother, always so strong, seemed to have aged 10 years in a matter of hours. "Everything will be all right, son," she said, holding my hand. But I could feel the tremor in her voice, the barely disguised fear. The days that followed were a nightmare. Each breath was a struggle, like drowning on dry land. Doctors came and went, adjusting medications, checking monitors. I could see the worry in their faces, hear the whispers in the hallways. "I've never seen a case progress so quickly," I heard one of them say when they thought I was asleep. Fear settled in me like a parasite. What if I couldn't overcome this? What if each breath was a countdown to the last? I tried to stay positive, but it was hard when your own body seemed to turn against you. On the 20th day, things reached their limit. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, feeling like I was suffocating. I pressed the call button in panic. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was a medical team rushing toward my room. "We need to take him to the ICU immediately," I heard someone shout. At that moment, I felt a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with my condition. It was fear, pure and simple, that maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't make it out of this. As they rushed me through the hallways, I saw my life flash before my eyes. All the moments I took for granted, all the things I still wanted to do. "Please," I whispered, not sure to whom. "I don't want to die like this." And then, the ICU doors closed behind me, and I plunged into darkness. The ICU was a world apart, a place where time seemed to crawl and fly simultaneously. The lights never completely went out. The beeping of machines was a constant, disturbing symphony. I floated between consciousness and unconsciousness, each moment a struggle to understand where I was and what was happening. The doctor spoke in jargon I barely understood. Oxygen saturation, blood pressure, mechanical ventilation. Each term sounded like a sentence, reminding me how serious my situation was. "We need to intubate," I heard a doctor say, his voice tense. "He's not responding to conventional treatment." Panic overwhelmed me. Intubation meant a tube in my throat, meant I could no longer breathe on my own. It was as if they were telling me my own body had stopped fighting. "Wait," I tried to say, but my voice barely came out. A nurse held my hand, her eyes full of compassion behind the mask. "Everything will be okay," she said softly. "We're going to take care of you." Before I could protest more, I felt the oxygen mask placed over my face. The world began to blur, voices became distant. Inducing coma in 3, 2, 1, and then darkness. The next 9 days were like a feverish nightmare. I floated in limbo, sometimes conscious enough to catch fragments of what was happening around me, other times plunged into a deep and terrifying void. At one point, I opened my eyes and saw my mother beside the bed. Her hands were clasped in prayer, silent tears running down her face. I wanted to tell her I was okay, that she didn't need to cry, but my body wouldn't respond. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own skin. "Mom," I tried to call, but no sound came out. The tube in my throat prevented me from speaking, leaving me even more frustrated and scared. At another moment, I heard voices discussing near my bed. I opened my eyes with difficulty, seeing blurry shapes I recognized as doctors. "The tests aren't showing improvement," one of them said, voice laden with concern. "If this continues, we'll have to consider." "No," interrupted another voice, firmer. "It's too early to give up. Let's try adjusting the protocol." Give up? Were they talking about giving up on me? Fear seized me with overwhelming force. I wanted to scream, tell them I was still here, still fighting. But my body remained motionless, betrayed by the illness and the machines keeping me alive. The days blended together, a blur of pain, fear, and confusion. Sometimes, I had the sensation of floating above my own body, watching the scene below like a spectator. I saw my family come and go, always with red and swollen eyes. I saw doctors checking monitors, adjusting machines, their expressions always serious and worried. One night, or was it day? I no longer knew. I had a vivid dream. I was in a long, dark hallway, with a bright light at the end. I started walking toward the light, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in weeks. But then, I heard a familiar voice calling me back. "Son, don't give up." It was my father's voice, normally so strong and sure, now broken with emotion. "We need you. Fight." I woke up gasping, or would have if I could really breathe on my own. The heart monitor beside me beeped frantically, alerting the medical team. In seconds, I was surrounded by nurses and doctors, all working quickly. "Blood pressure is dropping," someone shouted. "We need to stabilize him." I wanted to tell them I was okay, that I had chosen to come back, to fight. But all I could do was lie there, motionless, while they fought to keep me alive. It was at that moment, at the height of chaos and desperation, that something changed within me. A fierce determination took hold of my being. I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to let this illness defeat me. For my family, for the doctors who wouldn't give up on me, and for myself, I was going to fight with every fiber of my being. And so, in the middle of that cold and impersonal ICU, surrounded by machines and people fighting to keep me alive, I made a silent promise. I was going to get through this. I was going to survive. And when I got out, I was going to value every breath, every moment, like never before. The heart monitor began to stabilize. The doctors exchanged surprised looks. "He's stabilizing," one of them said, amazement evident in their voice. "Continue monitoring closely." I couldn't smile, couldn't speak, but internally, I was screaming with joy. The battle wasn't won yet, but for the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. And that spark, small as it was all I needed to keep fighting. The induced coma was like being trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Time lost all meaning, days melted into a shapeless mass of darkness, punctuated by brief moments of semi-consciousness. It was like swimming in a deep, dark ocean, occasionally approaching the surface, only to be dragged back into the depths. In the rare moments when I managed to open my eyes, the world around me was a confused blur of blinding lights and indistinct shadows. Figures moved around me, their voices muffled and distorted as if I were hearing them underwater. I tried to focus, tried to understand what was happening, but my brain seemed wrapped in cotton, unable to process information. Once, I managed to distinguish my sister's face. She was sitting beside my bed, holding my hand. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she spoke to me in a low voice. "Hi, little brother," she said, forcing a smile. "You need to wake up soon, you know? Pedro is asking about his uncle. He says he wants to show you the new trick he taught the dog." I wanted to respond, wanted to tell her I was there, that I could hear her. I tried to squeeze her hand, move my fingers, do anything to show I was conscious. but my body refused to obey. It was as if my mind and body were disconnected, two separate entities that couldn't communicate. The frustration was overwhelming. I was trapped inside myself, unable to interact with the outside world. I wanted to scream, cry, kick, anything to show I was still there, still fighting. But all I could do was lie there, motionless, while the world kept turning around me. The doctors and nurses were constant presences, always checking monitors, adjusting equipment, discussing my case in low voices I could barely understand. Oxygen levels are still low, I heard one of them say in one of those moments of semi-consciousness. We need to increase ventilatory support. And what about organ damage? Asked another. With this poor oxygenation for so long, the voice faded as I was dragged back into darkness. But the fear remained. Organ damage. What did that mean for me? For my future? If I survived this, what kind of life awaited me? At other times, I had vivid and disturbing dreams. In one of them, I was in a giant maze, running desperately, looking for the exit. Every time I turned a corner, I only found more identical corridors, endless. I could hear my family's voices calling me, but I couldn't find them. I woke from that dream, if you can call it waking when you're in a coma, with my heart racing, the heart monitor beeping frantically. "Calm down, Mr. Silva," I heard a nurse say, her voice soft and comforting. "Everything's all right. You're safe." But I didn't feel safe. I felt lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainties and fear. The days, or were they weeks? I no longer had any notion, dragged on. Sometimes, I had the strange sensation of floating above my own body, watching the scene below like a disembodied spectator. I saw doctors making their rounds, my family taking turns at my side, the machines working tirelessly to keep me alive. In one of those moments of almost supernatural observation, I saw my parents talking with a doctor in the hallway. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the body language said it all. My father, always so strong, seemed to have aged years in just a few days. My mother cried silently while the doctor spoke, her hand clutching the cross she always wore around her neck. I wanted to comfort them, tell them I was fighting, that they weren't going to lose me. But I was trapped in that state of helpless observer, unable to do anything but watch. It was during one of those moments that I had an experience I still can't explain. While floating above my body, I felt a presence beside me. I couldn't see anything, but I felt a sensation of warmth and comfort that I hadn't experienced since all this began. "It's not your time yet," I heard or felt a voice say. "You still have much to do." The next instant, I was back in my body, the sounds of the ICU filling my ears again. But something had changed. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope, a renewed determination to fight, to survive. I don't know how much time passed after that. The coma continued, but now I had something to hold on to. Every time the darkness threatened to engulf me, I remembered that voice, that feeling that my journey wasn't over yet. And then, on what seemed to be the 9th day, as I discovered later, something changed. I felt my consciousness slowly returning, as if emerging from a very deep dive. The sounds around me became sharper, sensations more acute. I opened my eyes, blinking against the bright ICU light. I saw familiar faces around me, expressions of surprise and joy spreading across them. "He's waking up," I heard someone exclaim. I tried to speak, but the tube in my throat prevented it. I panicked for a moment, but then felt a hand holding mine. "Easy, son." It was my father's voice, laden with emotion. "You did it. You've come back to us." Waking from the coma was just the beginning of a new phase in my struggle. The days that followed were a roller coaster of emotions and physical challenges that tested my determination like never before. The ventilation tube was removed the day after I woke up, a procedure that, although necessary, was uncomfortable and frightening. When I could finally speak, my voice came out hoarse and weak, almost unrecognizable to myself. "Water" was the first word I could pronounce. The nurse brought me some ice cubes to suck on, explaining that my throat needed to get used to working again. The doctors were a constant presence, always checking my vital signs, adjusting medications, and asking questions to assess my mental state. I could see the surprise in their eyes every time I responded to their questions, or they checked my test results. Mr. Silva, said Dr. Rodriguez, the pulmonologist leading my medical team, I must say that your recovery is remarkable. Considering the state in which you arrived here, it's almost, well, some would call it miraculous. I wanted to share with him the experience I had during the coma, the sensation of a comforting presence, the voice that told me it wasn't my time. But the words got stuck in my throat. How could I explain something that I barely understood myself? My family was always nearby, their faces a mixture of relief and constant worry. My mother hardly left my side, her hands always ready to adjust my pillow or hold my hand. My son, she would often say, tears in her eyes, you don't know how much we prayed. There were days I thought we would lose you. I would squeeze her hand in those moments, unable to find words to comfort her. How could I express the whirlwind of emotions I felt? Gratitude for being alive, fear for what the future held, guilt for having caused my family so much suffering. Physical therapy began a few days later, a new battle I wasn't prepared to face. My muscles, weakened by weeks of inactivity, trembled with the slightest effort. Lifting an arm, sitting up in bed, tasks I used to do without thinking now required all my concentration and energy. Come on, Mr. Silva, Mariana, the physical therapist, would encourage me as I struggled to stand for the first time. You've already overcome the worst. This is a piece of cake for you. But it didn't feel like a piece of cake. Every movement was a struggle, every breath a reminder of how close I came to losing everything. There were moments of intense frustration when my body refused to cooperate, when exhaustion overwhelmed me after just a few minutes of exercises. I can't, I muttered once, after a particularly difficult session. It's too much. It was my father who surprised me at that moment. He, who had always been a man of few words, approached my bed with a determination I rarely saw. Listen, son, he said, his voice firm but kind. You didn't come this far to give up now. Remember when you were a child and wanted to learn to ride a bicycle? You fell, you got hurt, but you didn't give up. This is no different. You're going to fall, it's going to hurt, but you'll get up again. Because that's what you do. It's what our family does. His words impacted me deeply, bringing to the surface a strength I didn't even know I still possessed. From that day on, I faced each physical therapy session, each examination, each challenge with renewed determination. The days in the ICU were long and often lonely, despite constant visits. At night, when silence fell over the hospital, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened, about how life can change in an instant, about the fragility of our existence. It was during one of those nights that I overheard a conversation I shouldn't have. Two doctors were talking outside my room, their voices low but still audible in the silence of the early morning. It's incredible, one of them was saying. With the oxygen levels he presented, we should be seeing significant damage to various organs. But the tests are coming back almost normal. I can't explain it, replied the other. In my entire career, I've never seen a recovery like this. It's almost as if what? Asked the first doctor when the other hesitated. As if something or someone was intervening, concluded the second doctor, his voice a mixture of confusion and admiration. I closed my eyes, feeling a shiver run through my body. The doctor's words resonated with the sensation I had during the coma, the inexplicable certainty that my journey wasn't over. The next morning, when Dr. Carvalho came to do her rounds, I decided to share part of my experience with her. Doctor, I began hesitantly. During the coma, I had a strange sensation, like someone telling me it wasn't my time. Is that normal? The doctor looked at me for a long moment before responding. Mr. Silva, she finally said, in medicine, we learn to trust science, to trust facts. But over the years, I've seen things that defy explanation. Your recovery is one of them. I can't explain what you experienced, but I can say that, whatever it was, I'm grateful for it. Her words stayed with me in the days that followed, giving me strength when challenges seemed insurmountable. Each small victory, breathing without assistance for longer, taking my first steps in the ICU hallway, eating my first solid meal, was celebrated not just by me, but by the entire medical team and my family. The 8th day after waking from the coma marked the beginning of a change that no one, not even the most optimistic doctors, could have predicted. I clearly remember waking up that morning feeling something different. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my chest, allowing me to breathe more freely for the first time in weeks. The night nurse, Donna Cecilia, a lady with gray hair and a gentle smile, was the first to notice the change. "Good morning, Mr. Silva," she said, approaching to check my vital signs as she did every morning. Her eyes widened as she looked at the monitor. "My God, what's wrong?" I asked, feeling a slight panic. "Is something wrong?" She shook her head, an incredulous smile forming on her lips. "Wrong? No, dear. Your oxygen levels. They've improved significantly overnight." Before I could process what that meant, Donna Cecilia was already calling the doctor on duty. Within minutes, my ICU room transformed into a center of frantic activity. Dr. Rodriguez arrived hurriedly, his coat still unbuttoned, clear evidence that he had been called urgently. He examined the monitors, frowned, and then began examining me personally. "Mr. Silva, how do you feel?" he asked, his stethoscope cold against my chest. "Better," I replied, surprised to realize it was true. "I can breathe more easily." The doctor nodded, an expression of amazement on his face. "Your lungs. The sound is much clearer. And your oxygen levels are almost normal. It's extraordinary." In the following moments, I was subjected to a battery of tests and examinations. X-rays, blood tests, pulmonary function tests. It seemed they wanted to verify every inch of my body. And with each new result, the expression of amazement on the faces of doctors and nurses only grew. "It's as if your lungs regenerated overnight," commented a young resident, looking at X-rays side by side. "One from yesterday and one from today." "Not just the lungs," added Dr. Rodriguez, leafing through a stack of test results. "All your organs that were showing signs of stress due to lack of oxygen. They're recovering at an incredible rate." I listened to all this in a state of shock and disbelief. It was hard to believe that, after weeks of struggle, my body was suddenly healing at a speed that defied medical explanation. My family was informed and arrived en masse. My mother entered the room with tears in her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "My son," she whispered, holding my hand. I knew our prayers would be heard. My father, always more reserved, stood at the foot of the bed, his expression a mixture of relief and amazement. "How?" he began to ask, looking at Dr. Rodriguez. The doctor shook his head, a perplexed smile on his face. "Honestly, Mr. Silva, I don't have a medical explanation for this. In my entire career, I've never seen such a rapid and complete recovery, especially in a case as severe as your son's." The following hours were a whirlwind of emotions and activities. I was transferred from the ICU to a regular room, a move that just days before had seemed like a distant dream. News of my miraculous recovery spread through the hospital, and soon my room was filled with doctors and nurses, all wanting to see for themselves the ICU miracle, as some began to call me. I felt overwhelmed by all of this. On one hand, I was immensely grateful and relieved. The prospect of a complete recovery, which before seemed so distant, was now within reach. On the other hand, I couldn't help but wonder, why me? What made my case so special? It was at the end of that day, when I finally had a moment of quiet, that I allowed myself to reflect on everything that had happened. I remembered the sensation I had during the coma, the voice that told me it wasn't my time. Could it be possible that? My thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of the hospital chaplain, Father Joao. He was a familiar figure, having visited my room in the ICU several times to comfort my family. "Good evening, my son," he said, his gentle smile lighting up the room. "I heard the good news and wanted to come personally to see how you are." "I'm fine," I replied, still trying to find the right words to describe how I felt. "Father, do you believe in miracles?" Father Joao sat in the chair next to my bed, his eyes shining with serene wisdom. "I believe there are things in this world that go beyond our understanding, my son. Call them miracles, call them blessings. The name doesn't matter. What matters is what we do with this second chance we're given." His words touched something deep inside me. I realized that, regardless of how or why this had happened, I had received a precious gift, a new chance at life. And what should I do with this opportunity, Father? I asked, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with this miracle. The Father smiled, gently placing his hand on mine. Live, my son. Live fully, with gratitude and purpose. Use this experience to bring more light to the world. Sometimes, the greatest miracles are not those that happen to us, but those we perform for others. That night, lying in my hospital bed, with the soft sound of monitors in the background, I made a silent promise to myself. I promised that, whatever the reason I had received this second chance, I would honor it. I would use this experience to help others, to bring hope where there was despair, to remind people that miracles, whether medical, spiritual, or simply the result of the incredible resilience of the human body, can happen. The days that followed my miraculous recovery were a roller coaster of emotions and discoveries. As my physical strength returned, I began to truly process everything that had happened. Daily medical visits now had a different tone, less of concern and more of scientific fascination. It was during one of these visits that Dr. Rodriguez, accompanied by a team of specialists, entered my room with an expression that mixed excitement and perplexity. "Mr. Silva," he began, nervously adjusting his glasses, "we have the results of your latest tests and, well, they're extraordinary." I sat up in bed, feeling my heart speed up. "What do you mean by extraordinary, doctor?" The doctor opened a folder full of papers and test images. "You see, considering the time you spent with critical oxygen levels, we expected to see significant damage to various organs. However," he paused, as if still trying to believe what he was going to say, "we found practically no permanent damage. Your lungs, heart, kidneys, liver, they're all functioning as if, well, as if nothing had happened." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of that revelation floating in the air. It was one of the specialists, a neurologist named Dr. Campos, who broke the silence. "Mr. Silva, I'd like to ask you some questions about your experience during the coma," she said, approaching the bed. "Did you have any unusual dreams or sensations?" I hesitated for a moment. Until then, I hadn't shared with anyone, except the chaplain, about the voice I heard and the sensation of presence I experienced. But something told me it was time to speak. "Actually," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "I had an experience that I can't explain. At one point, I saw myself floating above my body, observing everything that was happening in the ICU." The doctors exchanged intrigued looks, but encouraged me to continue. "And then, I felt a presence beside me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. And I heard a voice, clear as day, saying that it wasn't my time yet, that I had a purpose to fulfill." Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward, his scientific curiosity clearly piqued. "And how did you feel after that experience?" I reflected for a moment before responding. It was as if something changed inside me. I felt a strength, a determination I didn't have before. "And after that, well, you saw the results." The room fell into contemplative silence. It was Dr. Campos who finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Mr. Silva, what you've described is what we call a near-death experience, or NDE. It's a phenomenon reported by many people who have gone through critical situations like yours. From a scientific point of view, we still don't have definitive explanations for these experiences. But what about my recovery?" I asked, feeling a mix of emotions: curiosity, hope, a touch of fear. "Do you have any explanation for that?" Dr. Rodriguez cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "From a medical point of view, your recovery is, well, to be frank, it's something that defies our current explanations. We could attribute it to a combination of factors: intensive treatment, your own physical resistance." "But," I encouraged, feeling there was more. "But," he continued, "I must admit that, in my entire career, I've never seen anything like it. It's as if your body had healed completely, erasing all traces of the battle it fought." At that moment, I felt a wave of emotion overtake me. Tears began to run down my face, not of sadness or fear, but of deep gratitude and awe for the mystery of life. "Doctor," I said, my voice breaking, What if I told you that what happened here goes beyond science? That maybe there are greater forces at play than we can understand? Dr. Rodriguez looked at me for a long moment, his eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and, surprisingly, a hint of hope. Well, he finally replied, after what I saw with you, I'm beginning to believe there are more things between heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy. In the days that followed, my story began to spread throughout the hospital. Patients from other floors asked to visit me, seeking hope in my experience. Doctors from other hospitals called, wanting to know more details about my case. But for me, the most important thing wasn't the attention or the miracle label that some tried to give me. It was the profound change I felt internally. Each breath was now a precious reminder of the second chance I had received. A week later, when I finally received my discharge, I left the hospital not only with a healed body, but with a new perspective on life. The words of the voice I heard during my experience resonated in my mind. You have a purpose to fulfill. And so, as I walked out of the hospital, supported by my family, with the warm sun of a new day on my face, I made a silent promise. I promised that I would use this second chance not just for myself, but to make a difference in others' lives. To bring hope where there was hopelessness, to show that miracles, whether medical, spiritual, or simply the result of incredible human resilience, can happen. My journey of recovery had ended, but a new journey was just beginning. A journey of discovery, of purpose, of deep gratitude for life in all its mysterious and wonderful forms. As my family's car drove away from the hospital, I looked one last time at the building that had been my home and battlefield for so long. A smile formed on my lips, not of relief for leaving, but of awe for the miracle I had experienced there. Where to now? My father asked, looking in the rearview mirror. I took a deep breath, feeling the air fill my healed lungs, and responded with a certainty that came from the depths of my soul. Wherever this new purpose takes me, Dad, I'm ready for whatever comes. And so, with a heart full of gratitude and eyes set on a future full of possibilities, I left behind not just the hospital, but also the man I used to be. Before me lay a new chapter, a new opportunity to live, and this time, I was determined to make every moment count.